The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of Acuma, its board of directors, its management staff, or its members. The podcast discussion presented is conversational in nature and for general information only.
Hello and welcome to Acuma's On Point Podcast, the policy series, where we focus on policy issues impacting the credit union mortgage industry. I'm your host, Peter Benjamin. Today's episode is being brought to you by LenderPrice, the most modern and proven product and pricing engine in lending. Whether it's enhancing the pricing experience or efficiently matching home buyers with the ideal loan program, LenderPrice empowers all credit unions to excel and innovate in today's dynamic market. Their cost-effective pricing engine provides modern APIs that deliver seamless integrations, full product and rate support, custom workflows, and it's simple and easy to use for loan originators. LenderPrice is proud to sponsor the Acuma On Point Podcast policy series, where discussions on the policy issues impacting credit union mortgage lenders take center stage. Get to know LenderPrice and book a demo at www.lenderprice.com. Joining us today, our resident expert is Zach Pfister, Policy Director with Brownstein. Zach, how are you doing today?
Peter, thanks for having me back. I'm doing great. Hope you're doing well.
My pleasure. Now, Zach, I don't necessarily know if I have bone to pick with you because you didn't necessarily do this. I can't pick a bone with you, but the last time we talked, and it wasn't on this podcast, but the last time we talked, it was right before I went on vacation. I literally said to you, I'm going on vacation tomorrow. I can't think right now. And that was like 2-3 weeks ago. And it seems like I went on vacation, and when I came, while I was gone, it just all went to you know what. I don't know what happened, but it all went to you know what. So if it's okay, let's just dive in. But I want to do things a little bit differently. I have a rather long list. So can we kind of go by my list, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's great.
And for the sake of our listeners, I'm not surprising Zach with with a surprise list. He has seen my list. He's fully aware of the topics that we're going to go over. But let's just go through it. Okay, so let's go back to June, because there's a lot of stuff that happened in June, and of course we'll catch everyone up to where we are, here in July, because this is July's, policy podcast episode. All right. So let's go back first to the House and Senate June hearings. I specifically want to focus on, the ones that occurred with Chopra. That it seems, back then, the common themes were a lot on, junk fees, appraisal, and AI, right? Can you kind of expand on that for me?
Sure. So Director Chopra spoke and testified at the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking Committee in June as part of his semi-annual report to Congress. Junk fees, in particular, are still very much in the frontal crusade of the CFPB and other agencies within the executive branch as well. Chopra, he really zeroed in on the need and the ability for the Bureau to take a more active role in these moving forward. What I would say is notable is that with respect to the recent CFPB mortgage RFI, Chopra did state that they do not plan on having a rulemaking prior to the election. However, they've indicated that there will be some proposed rulemaking later in the year that focuses squarely on mortgage closing costs. And if we recall from the earlier issued RFI and prior to that, the CFPB's blog posts, they're really zeroing in on a range of closing costs, including origination fees, credit reporting fees, appraisal fees, and the like. My personal opinion is that they're most interested in credit reporting fees. Those two hearings received significant focus on the issue. And I think that the CFPB, as we've previously discussed, feels quite emboldened right now, given the recent Supreme Court decision, and plans to move full steam ahead despite where November may take the executive branch in terms of outcome. The agency will continue to move forward forcefully. We should expect a continued focus on the enforcement side as well. I know we're going to talk about some other Supreme Court decisions,
Sure.
at some point too.
We most certainly are.
But that will play a factor in how they proceed. However, I do not believe at the moment it will serve as a deterrent.
So I know this is all, it's a game of chess, right? And we are going to dive into the election a bit later in this episode. But if he's not planning on doing any changes or rulemaking until post election, what if there is a change, right? What if it does end up going Republican?
Then, then one of two things, if not both things, could occur. So the first is there's not to get too technical, but rules initiated or promulgated during a certain period leading up to a new administration are subject to what's known as the Congressional Review Act, which means that Congress has the ability to claw back or repeal that process, kind of stop it in its tracks. That's one thing to consider as we enter into the second half of the year. The other thing is that in a new administration, the tradition that Biden did this and Trump did this before him, and every president does some form of this. One of the first executive orders that they issue is kind of a regulatory freeze. They stop and pause all rulemakings that are underway. They get their teams into these agencies in cabinet level positions. They thoroughly review, and then they decide whether or not they're going to continue as previously proposed, whether they're going to repurpose or whether they're just going to let it die. So obviously, any administration has to proceed as if they're going to be enjoying a second term. However, all of these factors are taken into consideration. And you're seeing this now with the rush of rulemakings having come out kind of across regulatory agencies in the first half of this year, trying to beat that Congressional Review Act deadline to get these rules locked into place. It doesn't prevent future administrations from reopening rules, but the process is obviously more arduous in that respect. So you're seeing quite the activity across the regulatory apparatus at the moment, because that window, that Congressional Review Act window, by most estimates, landed somewhere in June. It's a floating deadline, given that it's based off the total number of session days that are remaining in a given Congress. And so, if Congress pulls days off the calendar, then that deadline moves. If they add days to the calendar, that deadline moves in another direction.
You do an excellent job of explaining this, and I love how you and Leah and Anne-Marie always tie it back to like Schoolhouse Rock, right? But like, it's an election year. Like, why go through all this if it's really just going to be for nothing? Potentially be for nothing, right? Is this just such a dog and pony show? I mean, why? Well, I guess because he can. Does he have to just is it that? I mean, so I listened. So Housing Wire 3 weeks ago had him on, right? And I listened to it, and I believe in his crusade. I believe that he really. I believe in the goal that he is that he believes in that junk fees are predatory and that they need to change and that it's doing harm to the consumer. I believe it 100%. That he's out, that he really wants to make a positive change for the consumer, right? As a lender, as a former lender, some of these fees that we can't control, it pains me to pass them on to the borrower, to our members, right? And so I heard his voice, and it was a genuine voice. Truly was a genuine voice. And so my hat's off to him, right? But why now? Why here we are, July, right? The end of July. Why now? When all this could just be for nothing?
Well, I mean, for starters, this has really been a buildup. I mean, this is the narrative of the junk fee campaign across the administration. Began kind of in earnest several years ago. Really, as inflation seemingly saw no end to its heights, it was one of the kind of tangible, digestible solutions that the administration felt would resonate well with the electorate. You can understand it easily, right? You understand. You may not understand why the fee is there, but you understand that you see a fee on the itemized receipt or on the room charge or on the loan. It may be a fee that's always been there. It may be a fee that has a purpose. And I think that is where some would argue that Chopra and others have kind of gone awry in this notion that, yes, all junk fees may be fees, but not all fees should be classified as junk fees, right? If it is a fee for service, if it is a fee for administering a loan application, for example, these are fees for service, right? Unnecessary or predatory fees are a different classification, and the longer this campaign has kind of ensued, I think from the outside view here, it looks like that universe of what's classified as a junk fee just continues to grow and grow and grow. And I think some observers would argue that this is kind of a race to the bottom, right? There will be no satisfying the most proponent, the biggest proponents of this endeavor until fees are an extinct term in the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Right. But even to that point, it's like they're never going to go away. Right. But it does seem like the CFPB is leaning toward that. I love Lord of the Rings. Right. they're leaning towards that one fee to rule them all.
Right.
Framework. Right. One fee per loan. Right. That seems like the framework that they're going to. Is that the sense that you're getting?
Well, I mean, I think that they've obviously been very aggressive on transparency, right? And so if you look back at, countless, White House roundtables on these topics and whatnot, and they've brought companies up there kind of across industry sectors. And I'll use Airbnb as an example, because Airbnb willingly participated and kind of came to the table on some of this transparency front, where if you used to be on a site like that, you used to see that you had the rental fee, and then you had kind of this basket of other fees bundled in there. But now you have the feature of where you can toggle back and forth between like the all-in cost or an itemized version of exactly which each fee is. And I think to the administration's intent on transparency, some of this makes sense, right? Like if you can break it down as much as possible to say exactly what these charges are, I think that the broad population would agree with that, right? But at the same time, if you are trying to your point, kind of eliminate it or just kind of encapsulate it into one fee at the end of the day, it's almost counterintuitive to the earlier notion, because what you're going to be left with in some industries is simply a repackaging of those fees, then in turn providing less transparency, right? If you revert back and if a mortgage lender, for example, took all the closing cost fees and just listed it as one singular closing cost fee, that fee would look a lot larger. They would be scrutinized for it. There would be calls for criticizing around a lack of transparency. So it's like it's a lose-lose situation. But the obviously the goal is to drive that down to nothing, right? And so it goes from a fee for service to free service. And for lenders like credit unions, especially, right, that there are limited sources of revenue to begin with. And for every dollar that goes or that is eaten towards a free service, which used to be a fee for service, it's coming out of the same bucket that might be used for, an extra auto loan or an extra mortgage or, a difference of some basis points on a loan. And that is hard to quantify, I think, for a lot of audiences, not least of which, proponents both in Congress and the administration who kind of refuse to look at it that way.
Okay. Last question on that. The House Financial Subcommittee, I was blown away by that this even came up, but it did in the House in the lines of questioning the Chopra CRA. Specifically as it relates to Navy Federal and credit unions. I don't even know why it even came up, but why won't this go away?
It is the age old question that seems to never die, and it seems to never be followed up with the fact that credit unions were born out of a mission to serve the underserved and the underbanked populations. They have a significant track record of success there without the forced requirements of CRA. Right? I was more surprised at how the question was posed, and maybe it was posed. Maybe there's rationale behind it that doesn't look to serve as a blanket question for all credit unions. Maybe somebody was having a bad day. However, I think what's more important is Chopra's response. Right? I mean, the question inevitably always gets asked by someone. However, his response was, yes, they should be under CRA. And this is one area where we can agree, where the banks can agree with us, that anyone enjoying these benefits should be under the CRA. And it's kind of a tired question and it's kind of a tired answer without recognizing the significant contributions to these populations that credit unions have not only played a role in, but played a leading role in. Right. Credit unions, whether it's a small teachers credit union or a CDFI or community development credit union, these are the kind of front lines in these underserved populations where they're making loans that others in industry simply will not make. And I know that they categorized it in a way, the question, I think, or maybe the response was categorized in a way not to solely call out credit unions. I think he used the term credit unions and non-banks, but I think we all know where that was aimed. And it was frustrating to see. But at the same time, credit unions should be incredibly proud of their track record on these issues. And while I don't see the calls for CRA to go away, I also think that credit unions are the most effective messengers out there on the underserved and underbanked, and they've got the track record to prove it. And I think they'll continue to stand up against this.
So I shouldn't roll my eyes every single time I see a summary that references CRA. I'll just expect it, and I won't roll my eyes, and I'll just move on. Got it. Hey, 10-4 on that. All right. So, like I said, the whole world went to fill in the blank while I was on vacation. So I have literally, people can't see my screen by like a list of 12 topics I want to discuss with Zach. But time is running short. But I'll jump around a bit. All right. So let's quickly hit the Federal Home Loan Bank review. It's still going on, right?
Yes.
So let's hit that real quick.
Yeah. So the system is undergoing a series of RFIs from FHFA as part of the rollout. The RFI on Mission, the deadline was July 15th. So just the other day, the comments have been rolling in on that front. They're shifting now their focus to the Affordable Housing Program RFI, which has a deadline of August 19th, which is seeking input on existing AHP application requirements in the process, opportunities for streamlining and improving the application process. Obviously, AHP has gotten some significant attention from the FHFA, from outside low-income housing proponents and from members of Congress. And there's a statutory requirement there for the banks at 10%. They've consistently exceeded that. They're closer to just above 15%. There have been calls in Congress for them to go to 20%, and for numerous reasons, which I can't get into in our limited amount of time. Those conversations are ongoing. But what this RFI is seeking is input kind of across the board on the program, its value, and any processes that could be streamlined or improved. I have no doubt that that some of the commenters will call for an increase in the statutory requirement. I don't know that is where this goes. However, it is a topic of conversation, and we'll see what comes of that. Following the AHP RFI, I think we're expecting an RFI on membership eligibility sometime in the coming months as well, and then we'll go from there. We'll see what type of comments come in on that. Obviously, there's plenty of dialogue around that front as well.
So when you say membership eligibility, the expansion of who qualifies for membership?
Potentially, yes.
That should be a fun one. All right. So let's. All right. Thank you very much for that. Let's move forward to all the great and fun things that happen in SCOTUS. Again, a lot of things happened over the July 4th week. The House and Senate were in recess, and like we wrote in our policy insights, SCOTUS said, "Hold my beer. We got this." They did a lot of stuff, and so much stuff. Just the other day, Biden was like, whoa, maybe we should have term limits for the Supreme Court. So kind of fill us in for the things that the Supreme Court was up to.
So the Biden state.
Let's talk about the big one.
Chevron.
Yeah, let's talk. That's the good one.
Yeah. So, in short,
and by the way, for those who can't see Zach right now, he literally put his hands on his head and kind of did like this little. I am exhausted of talking about Chevron. This has been the vein of my existence for the past few days. So keep going, Zach, please.
Yeah. So, in short, this has been a long time coming. It has worked itself through the process. The decision is out. And basically what the decision means from a practical standpoint is that regulatory agencies that are not explicitly authorized by Congress may have all of their rulemakings put to the test on boundaries and authority, right? So what this means is that if they weren't explicitly authorized to promulgate said regulation, that there's plenty of legislation that Congress passes that says the CFPB shall promulgate a rule on XYZ, or the FTC, or the NCUA. And then there are plenty of agency rulemakings and guidance and the like that are issued that do not have congressional, express congressional authority or directive. Basically, what this means is there's going to be a whole heck of a lot of litigation moving forward on past enacted statute. There's also going to have to be considerable consideration given to future rulemakings and how much latitude an agency will give themselves on interpreting congressional intent and promulgating a rule, because everything, if not fine-tooth comb at this point, will be subject to litigation. And now said litigation has, can have standing with the Chevron decision. From my opinion, from what this means for industry, it could be twofold, right? It gives industry, ample opportunity to litigate past grievances, but also, on the flip side, future rulemakings might be lengthier. They might take more time. They may never occur in the first place. if you have to rely on express consent from Congress on a rulemaking for every single rulemaking, we're either going to have a really active Congress or a really inactive regulatory apparatus if that's the design moving forward. I say this as not as an attorney. I am not an attorney. However, my understanding is that there are months and months and months of case law review ahead before anyone has a full grasp of just how impactful this decision will be. But it is very impactful.
Yeah.
Now, what I will say, not that they're related, but the president did just also announce his intention to, seek term limits for Supreme Court justices.
It's just a coincidence.
Totally coincidence. There's no news going on right now, so we had to make some. The term limits. The term limits argument is not. It is not new. It is a favorite of the more progressive wings of Congress. Look, I will say that Democrats have had a bad run on the Supreme Court. Just like, not to inject too much politics to this, but like the whole notion of how Supreme Court justices are nominated and approved, confirmed in today's modern political system, it's all politics, right? I mean, the litmus tests, the campaigns, the fundraising around, like, if you elect me, I'll nominate judges that do X, Y, Z. It's all politics. We've had a bad run because of, life tenures, and just depends on who's in office when. And
when you say we, when you say you're speaking,
I say that
you say the Democrat between you and Leo, right?
Yeah, I'm the Democrat. Leah's the Republican.
That's right.
But we're both pretty purple. The interesting, some are questioning whether that's even constitutional. And the interesting thing is that Article 3 of the Constitution does not say judges shall have a lifetime appointment. It says judges shall hold their offices during good behavior, which has no end date to it and has historically been interpreted to mean as long as they wish to carry out the duties, i.e. lifetime appointments. There have been some proposals in Congress introduced just recently that would put these terms at 18 years. I can say with a great deal of confidence that if there's a number less than 0, that's the chance of this happening. It would require full party control of a party that wanted this to happen with a 60 vote threshold in the Senate, because this is a very controversial issue. And if you're the party that's enjoying the fruits of recent appointments to the Supreme Court, then you want none of this, right?
Right.
So, and not to say the shoe wouldn't be on the other foot if the tables were turned, but that's the dynamic we're currently in. So I saw the headline. We all saw it. We are in campaign mode, and that is pure political message.
It just so happens to come a week, a week after Chevron, but
right.
Just coincidental. Right. And it just so happens. So I think I read an article that if Trump is elected, he stands to gain potentially 3 more Supreme Court seats, right? Or at least the Republican Party stands to gain 3 more potentially, right?
Given the age of some of the justices, he could have an opportunity to, just by the natural course of lifespan, and generally when some Supreme Court justices have chosen to retire instead of, die in office, he could have upwards of 3 opportunities to nominate new justices. They would likely be replacements for existing justices. On the conservative side of the bench. However, let's just say, I think Clarence Thomas is the oldest. Let's say Clarence Thomas decided that January of 2025 was a good time to hang up the robe. Trump gets another shot, right? And he can seek to appoint a conservative in the mold of Clarence Thomas, for example.
Yeah. All right. Last, before we need to dive into elections, we just have to. But before we do, a quick hit. Just recently, Biden announced his proposal for rent control. I just have to ask, with everything happening in housing, and affordability. I understand, rent is skyrocketing and people are having problems controlling rent, especially at lower incomes, right? At lower incomes, people are walking away with, I think I read it, that lower income, I think it was about $30,000 and below. When people make less than $30,000 below, they walk away with less than $300 at the end of the year, which is nothing. But why all this attention on rent? Why not why not focus a little bit more on buying?
I mean, it's a good question. I think that I think there's a significant number of home buyers and homeowners in this country, and there's a significant number of renters in this country, and they are both populations are facing the pressures of inflation and of stretching the dollar further. The same with with rates and the like. What I would say is, the president has put proposals out on the buy side of the equation as well, and he faces the same challenge here, right? Which is most of these proposals require an act of Congress, right? So on the buy side, he put out, in his budget, and then again, throughout the summer, proposals on first-time home buyer tax credits, first-generation home buyer tax credits. A litany of different proposals for kind of state-funded down incentive programs, and on rent, on this particular issue, in particular, like the rent control issue, he has kind of, and I don't know if this was inadvertent, but they have alluded to this throughout the housing blueprint process that they kicked off, last year. They've never followed through with this call. And again, back to, our immediately previous conversation, like the timing is kind of suspect. He made this comment kind of off the cuff, off script, during his speech at the NATO summit. So it was definitely, like, it was towards the end, it was definitely out of context, right? He went from talking about all the national security, achievements of his administration, and then worked in, I think he actually said corporate and residential rents. Point being, it caught a lot of people off guard. Folks we talked to on the Hill, folks we talked to downtown, I think folks in industry, certainly. I mean, it and what it is seeking to do, I don't know if it's like a carrot and a stick approach. Basically, it's like, if you raise your rent more than 5%, then you're not going to be eligible for your tax depreciation benefits. Well, the problem with that is that this would require not only an act of Congress, but probably an act of a Democratic Congress. Like, rent control is extremely controversial issue at the federal level. Obviously, different states have various measures in place, but it has never gained traction on the federal level, especially obviously with Republicans. But I think even some Democrats question the efficacy of such a blunt force object. And again, I think, trying to be as objective as possible, you kind of look at that and you're like, it kind of goes to your earlier question. Like, why now? Like, why would you propose this now when it has no chance of ever becoming law? And the best thing I can say is, it's campaign season. And I look at this and I don't see anything more than that. I think his buy side prospects or proposals have a lot more teeth, right? I mean, we've done first time home buyer tax credits in the past, right? I mean, they have, and they proved successful. The problem is that this Congress doesn't function in the same way that Congress's prior functioned, whether it was the early 2000s or the 90s or the 80s. And that level of comity is no longer there, and it makes even what is seemingly common sense much more challenging. That said, I think everything's on the table next year during the tax reform is going to be the big ticket item next year. And whether it's full Republican control or whether it's divided government with Democrats, proposals like these will get some attention. And LIHTC will be in there too. Like, they will get attention, and I think they will get a fair shake and consideration in the broader scheme of things.
Okay. Well, we're well over time. I'll repent with Justin later. But in 30 seconds, And I have to keep you to 30 seconds. Quickly hit me with the election stuff.
Sure, Peter. I'll try to encapsulate it in 30 seconds or less as best I can.
I know it's going to be hard.
It's been quite a July. Let's just put it that way. The events of a few weeks ago, when the president had an attempted assassination on his life, very serious matter, a very bipartisan response. Congress initiated immediate investigations. We've seen since then the director of the Secret Service step down, and from there, other happenings in the month of July. Democrats spent the better part of the month deciding whether they wanted Biden to ultimately be their nominee after a very questionable and poor performance in the June 27th debate. Ultimately, on July 21st, Biden stepped down. He threw his full support behind Vice President Harris. And in the intervening 36 hours, her campaign raised $100 million. What that means for the race, conventional wisdom would suggest that at least Democrats believe they have a renewed shot at taking on President Trump. In the interim, he also selected a vice presidential candidate during the RNC convention in J.D. Vance, someone who mirrors in many ways his own policy proposals. And what this means at the end of the day, as Democrats head into their own convention in August, is quite a stark contrast in options. The poll after poll suggested that Americans viewed both candidates with more unfavorable opinions than favorable. There was a degree of bipartisan agreement that both candidates were on the older end of the segment, and a sizable proportion of these polls suggested that Americans wanted a different option. Now they have one. That said, there's a lot of runway between now and November. It will be a sprint, but it will also be a marathon. They've got 100+ days to figure this out, and there's only one victor in the end. However, this is yet again another example of the race kind of being upended. We talk about October surprises. Every October in a presidential election, there seems to be some big event that could potentially change the dynamic of the race. Mm-hmm. July had several of those. And at the rate this election is going, one for the history books, I would expect that we have several more months of October ahead of us.
Okay. So I know I said 30 seconds or less, and we kind of went a little bit over that, but I do have a question, right? And it's probably an easy answer, but, obviously Biden steps down. Harris is obviously the new person, stepping in as the front runner for the Democratic Party. Initially, we had this conversation where if Biden was a step aside, and the new bid was to go to Kamala Harris, whether or not she could rally the Democratic Party, and there was some concern as to whether or not she could, right? I think based off of the fact that she's been able to quickly raise that much money in such a short period of time, it seems like she's able to, right? Even regardless of the fact that Trump, even after the assassination attempt, that most certainly rallied that Republican Party.
Sure,
this is gonna be a good race, right?
And I think it's fair to say for both campaigns, the unfortunate events of the attempted Trump assassination did serve to unify his Republican supporters. Similarly, the exit of Biden injected a fresh revitalization of the energy on the Democratic side, evidenced by the fundraising, no doubt. Jury's still out on how the polling shakes out. None of the polling leading into the convention or leading into Biden's ultimate exit is relevant at this point, because those polls were hypotheticals, right? Even polls that hypothetically put Trump against Harris are not accurate given the light of the situation. And we'll have to wait a couple weeks to see how this kind of resonates in the general electorate. But one thing is certain, This is this is very much viewed as a reset and a scramble. The entire campaign up to date was pitted against two men in their late 70s, early 80s, and the campaigns were built around that. Right now, both campaigns are trying to figure out their best path to victory, and it's not going to be the same playbook that it was 3 weeks ago.
Thank you very much. Well, Zach, appreciate your time today. We're well over time, a little bit longer episode, but like I said in the beginning, a lot happened. And really, since the last episode that we recorded just a few weeks ago, we had to cover a lot of it in a short amount of time, which we unfortunately didn't. But like I said, I'll repent later with Justin. Appreciate you kind of going over some of the topics I want to discuss with you. As always, appreciate you and everything that you do for our members.
Thanks, Peter. Great to see you.
You too. Thank you again to Lender Price for sponsoring our policy series. And to all of you, we know your time is valuable. Thank you for tuning in to the latest episode of Acuma's On Point podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, be well, my friends.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time at the Acuma On Point podcast. If not already, be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. For more great episodes and information, be sure to visit us online at acuma.org. And to get the latest updates, head over to our LinkedIn page.